So, as the Prime Minister promises to work with the U.S. administration and with Canada's international partners to highlight the negative impact of these tariffs, let's look at the impact on Canadian producers. Sault Ste. Marie is home to several steel plants, including Algoma Steel, one of the largest production facilities in the country. It employs thousands of people in northern Ontario, and the city is also closely tied to the United States, situated along the Canada-US border and just across the St. Mary's River from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. Matthew Shoemaker is the mayor of Sault Ste. Marie. Mayor Shoemaker, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So what will this tariff mean for your community? Do you have any sense at this time how many jobs may be lost and the downstream effects this tariff will have on your city?
Yeah, well, as it relates to job losses, I think that's for the company to figure out whether or not that there will be any impact on the jobs. But the reality is there will be dollars taken out of the Sault Ste. Marie economy as a result of this. We had steel tariffs imposed on Canadian steel in 2018, 2019 during President Trump's first term. And the reality of it was almost, it was hundreds of millions of dollars out of the local economy. And so that meant hundreds of millions that wasn't being spent on things like local restaurants, groceries, tourism dollars that weren't being spent. So there will be a downstream effect on consumer spending locally because of this.
Okay, speaking of 2018, were there any lessons learned from that experience that may help you this time around?
Yeah, there were. And what really seemed to break the logjam in 2018 was when the counter-tariffs were imposed, targeted at legislators who had the president's ear. So that is what we as a community, and I think the industry is hoping to see from the federal government. Of course, they've been relatively quiet on what the proposed response is going to be, only that they would come up with a proposed response. We want to see a targeted, aggressive counter-tariff response on products and materials that will focus in on districts that the president needs, that the president's base is in, so that those people, those voters and those legislators can talk to President Trump and try and get him to change course on this.
Okay. Beyond imposing retaliatory tariffs, is there anything else you'd like the federal and provincial government to do to help the situation?
Well, what they did last time when there was steel and aluminum tariffs imposed was they invested heavily in these companies to make sure that they could be ready for the next attack, and unfortunately that's come sooner than any of us expected with the second Trump presidency. But they invested hundreds of millions into the steel plants at Stelco, at Dofasco, and here at Algoma Steel to make sure we transitioned from a coal-based steelmaking to an electric-based steelmaking. Unfortunately, that transition isn't quite there yet. We're kind of halfway through the process now, where we've got all the legacy costs of the coal-based steelmaking and all the upstart costs of the electric steelmaking. So we're kind of in the middle of a river, not close to either shore at this point. And we need to get to the other side until we can be kind of on secure footing. And this is really throwing a wrench in those plans.
You're surprised by how quickly it happened?
I am, because, what we were expecting from the federal government last week was a 30-day pause on tariffs, and we were preparing for broad-based tariffs across the Canadian economy. We got reprieve from that last Tuesday or Monday, I think it was, and then, less than 6 or 7 days later, the goalposts moved, and suddenly we're facing down steel and aluminum tariffs that will hurt Sault Ste. Marie's economy disproportionately to how the kind of broad-based tariffs would have impacted the whole country. So now we are kind of in this fight with a few other communities, Regina, Hamilton, and communities in Quebec that produce aluminum. But we are still encouraging the Canadian population to buy Canadian, to make sure that that sense of patriotism that flared up last week is still there, and that people understand that the threat on these communities is a threat against all of Canada.
All right. What are you hearing from residents of your town, people who may be employed directly or indirectly by the steel industry? Are people worried?
Absolutely. It's a lot of anxiety, a sense really of betrayal, as you noted in your opening remarks. We are on the American border and they are on the Canadian border. And there has been a 212-year history of peaceful relationship here since the War of 1812. And all of that, I think, is under threat right now because there is a distrust of the American government from the part of Canadians, and there is an unwillingness to engage with our neighbors across the river and further afield the way we have historically. There have been, the history of our community is one where Canadians go across and treat Sault, Michigan like part of our own community, and Americans come across and treat Sault, Ontario as part of their own community. So that sense of, one community across two nations, as we've called it, is really frayed and at risk of being broken.
Yeah, and maybe not forever, but for a long time.
For a long time, and we faced this separation during COVID where people couldn't cross the border. Of course, during that period, it was because of the public health emergency, but the border was practically shut down for everyone. And there was, great disappointment and a sense of loss of neighborhoodly relations because of it. And here we are facing something similar this time because of the irrationality of the American government.
Right. Do you have some confidence that the tariffs will, again, this time be temporary, since knowing that they'll harm American companies and workers as well?
Yeah, I think what it doesn't give me comfort, but what is the reality of these tariffs is that they are the Trump tax increase on American consumers. They will cost Americans more money out of their pocket every time they buy a Tesla, which Algoma Steel goes into, every time they buy a hot water tank, if they're a new first-time home buyer. This will increase prices on American consumers. The aluminum tariffs will increase the price of a beer can. And so every time an American buys one of these products, the cost will be higher because of what the federal American government is doing. So I am confident that the more the pressure is applied to the American consumer, the more there will be the willingness on that part of the American federal government to back down.
All right. Mayor Matthew Shoemaker, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.